First of all, okay, hello everybody, and welcome to tonight's event. So we're here to talk about how to craft a powerful narrative to ace your Google interview. And what I will really be discussing today is how to make sense of your own journey from the perspective of the hero's journey so that you can stand out as a candidate. And I want to tell you, first of all, a little bit about the structure of the event. So we're going to have a presentation that is meant to last about 30 minutes. And then after that, there's going to be time for questions. Having said that, if there's anything that is not clear throughout the presentation, and if you feel the need to ask for questions, the chat is open at any time. And Danish is here to help me out and actually point me to your questions whenever they come up. Okay. So, okay, a little bit of housekeeping as well. I just wanted to let you know that you will get a recording within 48 hours. And you can also check out the bundle that I've created for you, which is available at my profile. So in case you're new to the Kairos platform, what we do is we offer coaching services in order to help you get into Facebook, Google, Amazon, etc. And I'm a Kairos coach. But I wanted to tell you a little bit more about me so that you know what kind of skills and expertise I bring to the table. So generally speaking, I have about 10 years of experience in the corporate sector. Over 5 of those years I've spent at Google, where I first worked in customer support and then moved on to sales roles. So just so you know, a lot of the examples that are in the presentation are based on sales roles, and that's just because that's my area of expertise. But we will talk about how they also apply to, you know, engineering, or whether you're going to work in marketing or project management or any other kind of role. Now, apart from my experience at Google, I've also worked at one of Norway's largest media house. And throughout the different experiences that I had, I started to develop a few years ago, well, let's say more like 5, a very keen interest in consciousness, inner work, as well as yoga and meditation. So I started my journey attempting, like many people do, a bit of yoga here, a bit of meditation there. And then I got certified as a yoga teacher. And I later also did an entire journey with the process called inner freedom, which looks really closely at how we sometimes take on the role of the victim whenever we haven't fully adopted or taken consciousness of the decisions we've taken and made along the road. And I wanted to just flag this because it's really relevant to what we're discussing today. So a part of the exercises that I'm going to guide you through are really meant to help you see what is the narrative that you are telling yourself in preparation for this interview, and whether or not there are any beliefs that you need to perhaps reframe. I also wanted to let you know that I am writing a book. And so a lot of what I will talk about will actually also take reference from the world of novels and movies in terms of how we actually write a story. Because as you will see during the presentation, storytelling is so fundamental to your success. And it's fundamental to your success during an interview, but it's also fundamental to your success overall. So when I work one-on-one as a coach with my clients, what I very often do is ask people to really tune into what they're telling themselves, as well as what they're feeling. Because that's the really interesting thing, that sometimes, or actually we live in a society that forces us to not really connect our minds and bodies. And so it's interesting that sometimes you might feel like you have a communication issue, but what's really going on is that it's the defense mechanism that's coming up because of the story you're telling yourself. So this, I hope, gives you a little bit of an overview of how I work. And now we can move on to today's talk. So I've decided to break this down into 3 main points to keep this really sharp and simple, and to leave plenty of time for the exercises, because these are exercises that are actually going to require quite some time. So first of all, I want to touch base upon what behavioral questions are and how answer types correlate with interviewing success based on some studies, as well as based on what Google interviewers will be waiting to hear from you. After that, we will look at the hero's journey, particularly look at how understanding this template for storytelling will make you into a more memorable candidate, which is something that is fundamental, because that's a really important bit to keep in mind. The people who are interviewing you at Google are not full-time interviewers. They are full-time something else. And your interview very often happens at the end of the day, or just before a very important client pitch, or before they're going to present to the director. So even as they're interviewing you, what they have in mind, I mean, of course, you will want them to be super present, but let's be real. People are really busy. And so that means that the more memorable you are, and the better you are able to convey a compelling and coherent narrative throughout everything that you say, the better will be the result of your interview. And then at the end, as announced, there's going to be some exercises. So let's dive deeper into behavioral questions. Now, first of all, I wanted to touch base a little bit on what makes a story compelling to a Google interviewer based on Google values and the requirements for success at Google. So I have 4 at the top, which are progression, retention, depth, and breadth. And then there are 3 at the bottom: growth mindset, an ability to thrive in chaos, and an ability to focus on the user or customer. So the reason why I have those divided into 2 is that the 4 above are usually used for people who have a professional background, so more so than for students who've just graduated, for example. But they are quite important in order to assess whether or not you're ready to take on this role. So by progression, what we mean is the ability you have to show how you've grown in your previous roles. So one typical way that people show up in an interview is, for example, when they're asked to tell about themselves, to, for example, list a series of companies that they've worked for. And what often goes missing there is the form of progression. So what we really want to know is not how many roles you've had. We want to know how you've gone from newbie to expert, right? Or how you have really made an impact in your current, or like in the role you were in, so that there was a change. And this is the key word that I want you to keep in mind. So if there's anything that you keep from this presentation, is the word change, because you will have to show exactly that, how you bring about change. Now, that also has to do with your ability to stay in the same place long enough for you to have an impact. So I've written that as retention, but the idea is really about, have you been job hopping forever and ever? because of lack of patience. You might have job hopped for a lot of reasons that are perfectly valid, so do not sweat this out. But can you show that you are someone who's dedicated to really becoming an expert at something? So can you show that you've gone deep, which is the next point? And also, can you show that you're able to have some breadth of experience so that you're not just looking at things from one perspective? And I want to give you an example of this. When I was at Google working in publisher solutions, I once interviewed a candidate. And this candidate had been working with publishers, but they had not been putting themselves in the shoes of the publisher. And I was able to infer this within one question, pretty much. Now, what this told me was that the person had done a great job in their current role. The numbers showed that, the way she talked about it showed that, but I could not be sure that she would do well in the next role, which is the number one fatal mistake that a lot of recruiters have told me people make when trying to change jobs. And this happens even within Google. So for Googlers that are already working within the company, in order to move to the next role, they have to be able to show that they are able to translate their achievements into future ability to grow, change, and develop, and thrive. And this leads us to the other three values that I have there, which are growth mindset, an ability to thrive in chaos, and to focus on the user or consumer. This will apply to your role at Google no matter what. There are a few others that it would be quite nice to keep in mind, such as under promise and over deliver. So if you're able to show that you went above and beyond for a customer, a client, or your role in the past, and you're able to make that into a guarantee that you're the kind of person that usually over delivers, that's going to give you good points. Now that you have an understanding of Google values, we can move on to a little bit of what's behind behavioral questions. So first of all, the important thing to understand is that these questions are there because they allow for structured interviews, which is another way of saying they allow us to remove bias as much as possible. Now, in practical terms, this means that the same interviewer or even different interviewers will be using the same questions to assess different candidates. And this is another very key thing to understand if you've not interviewed at Google before or at one of the FANG companies, because I believe this is fairly shared. What might happen in a situation where you're interviewing with a small and medium-sized company is that you walk into the interview and the person will ask you questions that will largely depend on what you say. And so you have a leverage or the possibility of shaping the interview in the direction that you want. But this is not going to happen with your interview at Google. The questions will be exactly the same for everybody or small variations of the same. And they are largely of two kinds. One is situational. So those sounds like, imagine that, suppose that, and things like that. So here I have the example with, imagine that you're tasked to draft a sales strategy to enter the Indian market. What would you do? And the thing that I would like to see here is that there is very often a willingness to keep up details. So I'm asking you to do a sales strategy to enter the Indian market, but I'm not even telling you for what product, right? So what's very compelling here is to be the kind of person that one can be thriving into chaos, which is exactly what we're asking you to do here. You've never done this before. How would you solve it? When asked this question, I've had candidates in the past answer with, I would ask the team. That is not the kind of answer that you want to give. Not because you don't want to be humble, but because, and this is a big and important point that we will touch upon on the hero's journey piece, we're not just looking to have heroes. So when I'm interviewing, what I want is somebody who's both a hero, like somebody that can really bring in the achievements and really show change and grow and mature, but I also want them to be my guide when I need it, right? And my guide is not going to go ask the team. They're going to come up with a solution for me, or at least questions. And now the other kind of question is based on past behavior. So this is more akin of, tell me about a time in the past where you've had to enter a new market. What did you do? And here you see that I've made variations of exactly the same question. It goes without saying that if you're asked about a situation you've never faced before, it can be smart to make it situational. So you could totally say, well, actually, this never happened to me, but if it were to happen, I would do X, Y, and Z. Now, another important suggestion that I would have is to think and prepare very closely for the questions which will relate to leadership and conflict solving. Now, this is particularly important because most likely there's going to be a question about both of them, and because if you were to be asked, tell me about that time you faced conflict, and your answer was, I've never experienced conflict, that's just not believable. So, I mean, of course you could be conflict avoidant, but even in that case, you want to acknowledge the conflict that you've not acknowledged. And this goes back to those exercises that we will do later. So to take a look at, how candidates do based on how they answer behavioral questions, there was a study done in the Netherlands where they looked at 62 interviews from 2014. And what they found was that only 23% of the candidates replied with a story or pseudo story. The rest of them used examples, values and opinion, or self-description. And what the people who carried out the study found was that telling a story correlates with higher recommendation, whereas providing a self-description correlates with failing the interview. And I just want to go deeper onto what does it mean to provide a self-description, which would be the case of somebody saying, I'm really structured, and so X, Y, Z. You want to show, not tell. So whenever you want to prove a point, for example, if your story is that you're really structured, the structure has to come up in every single one of the answers that you give. It has to come up in the examples that you provide, in the stories that you make up. And it has to be coherent all throughout. And so here is where we go into the hero's journey, just to understand how exactly can you build a coherent narrative throughout the entire interview, which I think is something very key, as one fundamental trait of interviewing at Google is that you only get about 4 to 5 minutes with each interviewer. And they have to be taking notes all the time, because the interview actually has to be written for them to create a paper explaining and justifying their decision. So the more you're able to convey what you have to say in a way that retells the same narrative over and over again, the easier it's going to be for them to remember it. But let's take a step back and think about what it means to be memorable. So I have a picture here of the Torre Eiffel, and I don't need to tell anybody here where this place is, because there is a very strong image association between the Torre Eiffel and Paris. Now, you've always heard that to be successful as a candidate, you have to be memorable. But what does it mean? Well, in storytelling terms, what makes something memorable are images, or is images. Because the thing is that with an image, you actually activate a part of the brain that's more creative and more connected. And thereby, you will activate your interviewer within, or you will activate a connection with the interviewer that a lot of words will just not manage to do. So let's look at the hero's journey as the story of all stories. Now, this was a template that was discovered by Joseph Campbell in 1993. And basically, it's the result of a large study that he did, whereby he took a look at myth, folktales, and legends across time. And what he found was that all of them have the same story and structure. So the framework basically sees a hero encountering a significant problem in their life, which usually is outer, right? So typical example, the big monster is going to invade the kingdom. But this leads to an inner problem. For example, oh my God, I'm afraid of the big monster. And so the hero goes into an adventure whereby they have to resolve it. And through that adventure, they go through change. So they come out transformed, and usually they come out transformed inside, right? So because this template is so recognizable and so universal, it can be used as a map, not just to tell a story, but also to analyze the change you have undergone, and therefore the type of change that you might be able to undergo. Now, basically, this breaks down into three parts. There's a departure, an initiation, and a return. To put it in other terms, according to Joseph Campbell, the hero always ventures into an unknown land. And the unknown land in our interviewing metaphor can be the one time you were thrown to work with a client that you did not know, and that was completely different from all of your previous clients. Or it could be the time where, as an engineer, you were tasked to fix a problem that nobody had fixed yet. So you literally went into this different realm, and there you were initiated into a kind of skill learning that you've returned back with. But behind every great story, there's a compelling idea. One idea, not 10 ideas. That's very, very important. And the reason why this is very, very important is that you might have the tendency during your interview to have a long list of things you want to convey. And this is the syndrome that shows up when somebody spends 10 minutes talking or answering their "tell me about yourself" question. It's an issue of prioritization, whereby you're not sure what's really important to say, and therefore you say it all. Except that by doing that, you might have used 10 minutes of your otherwise really precious time to tell this very compelling idea that makes you stand up apart. And so here I wanted to show you three compelling ideas of work that you for sure know, such as Romeo and Juliet, where the compelling idea was love is so strong that it's the strongest of loyalty, even the loyalty to life. Or the Shawshank Redemption, where the idea was no matter what happens to you, you always have a choice. Now, how does this relate to you interviewing? Well, it relates to you interviewing in a way whereby you are able to convey not just that you've succeeded in the past and that therefore you're great at what you do, but how you specifically succeeded. And so here I want to tell you about this one interview that this one person I interviewed about 10 years ago. So I asked this person to give me an example of productivity or something like that. Like, he had to tell me a story. And what he told me was that when he was 6 or 7 years old, he started to go out and collect frogs in his garden. And then he went to the neighbor and tried to sell them the frogs. Now, you clearly see that this was somebody saying, I am proactive, which is not the same narrative of somebody else trying to sell you the same concept, I am successful at sales. But he would tell you a story like, I'm very data driven. So for the last client that I had, what I did was analyze their performance up to this year and then take a look at all of the untapped opportunities they had this year compared to the year before and compared to the rest of the market. And therefore I came up with this pitch that led to X, Y, and Z result. The key differentiator is not going to talk about a result. It's going to talk about the how. And I've put here a list of 4 hows that I could come up with just by thinking of 4 different colleagues that I've had who were all equally successful, but in very, very different ways. Now, the question is, are you aware of the very different way in which you manage to drive in the results? And are you able to tell that throughout your interview so that that's the idea that the interviewer walks out with? So this also brings up, at least for me, this a sentence by Carl Jung, who said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate, which is the idea that by bringing to the light the things that really make us unique, we can get ownership of them and therefore have more agency in our life. So this is also for me very important to mention, because the fact of not having a compelling idea in your interview and not being able to really stop and think about your journey so far might have you fall into the pitfall of trying to be liked by your interviewer, which is totally understandable. I've certainly been there many times, but that's a distracting idea. What makes interviewing, or what makes somebody interviewing really successful, is a certain clarity. And so the story you tell can be the thread that you use in order to convey that clarity. And so the question is, how can you find that story? And here I want to invite you to our first exercise. I'm aware that we've already used half an hour, so I'm going to try to speed this up. But the first exercise is truly to find a story from your childhood that relates to a key skill the job you're interviewing for demands. And here I want to invite you to think about that skill in terms of need versus want. So you'll probably see the job description for your role, and I'm sure you've read it many, many times. Now, please be aware that the job description is a guiding principle at Google, because jobs change very often, even if the role maintains the same title. And But what I want to invite you to do is to think about, what is the underlying skill that is behind something. So here, for example, for project management, I've put organizing something spontaneously. Like having a desire to create structure can be one of the underlying needs. And well, one thing I really do want to make clear is that, in the job description, there are a series of wants that the hiring manager will have. And it is quite important to address those. Like if the hiring manager wants to know whether or not you've managed a conflict in the past, you better have an answer to that. But beyond the wants, there's also a need. And that need really relates back to this idea of, is this person going to swim once I throw them into the water on their own? And how will they swim? And also, what's a unique skill that they're going to bring to my team? Because that's another thing that's quite important in this age of, luckily, revival of the idea of diversity and inclusion. There is a diversity of skills. So imagine that you're going to get into a team where, everybody is right-handed. That's a very, very cliche example. But you bringing in your left-handedness is going to be an asset. So you should never be afraid of figuring out what's the special sauce that makes you you, and communicate that, even though you have in mind the one skill that is key for success. So, I mean, if you're applying for an engineering role, of course, we want to hear how you are able to do engineering. But I also want to hear what's a special way that you use to solve a problem. So is it by talking to people? Is it because you are particularly adept at writing code? Is it because you're great at reading somebody else's code and finding mistakes, so you're like the troubleshooter? Or is it because you have a heart for data and thereby you're able to take a look at a certain code and come up with, a data-driven idea? Sorry, I'm making this very complicated, but there are so many ways of being a good engineer. Like there are so many ways of being a good designer and a good salesperson. So here I was just wondering, Danish, would you have an example of a story from your childhood that could apply to the world you're in now?
Yeah, so I've always been really good at project management. So I was, as a child, being from Asia, we did not have much money. So what I used to do was when I was about 13 years old, it's a very cliche example, but I tried a lemonade stand. And what I did was in the summers, um, I used to take, we call this sherbet in our land. And I used to go and grab some lemons, grab some sugar, and just outside the house, especially where people used to play sports, I used to go and just set it up. And that was a very early example of entrepreneurship, but it taught me, ingenuity, like how to mix things up. And that money actually came into my savings, and I bought really nice stuff for myself. But that is an example that I bring up all the time about project management, because I had to not only get the ingredients, but I also had to set up a space. I had to actually, just put up a sign and then manage the logistics of that. So that's one example and it always helps. At least it starts the narrative. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. See, this is the perfect structure, because it not only tells the story, it also explains a little bit of the transformation. You talk about some of the lessons you've learned in the process. What would have been even better is to explain the situation that gave rise to that. Like, for example, I was 13 years old and I really wanted to buy a Walkman. I don't know, maybe at that time. Right? And that's how I did, or that's why I did XYZ.
Awesome.
Okay, so that's the first exercise. And then the second exercise, it's going to be more complicated. So this is a map. You want to take a fresh paper for this and make a circle at the center. And if you have the time, I would strongly encourage after this event that you spend, not necessarily today, but at least 1 hour going through this exercise, because it's going to be revelatory in many ways. Now, the time frame that you want to think about, because this circle is actually a time frame, it's based on the idea of circularity. Things return over and over. I also have a circle there, which is a reminder for myself of that. And very often we fall into the same patterns. So I want you to think about your career for a meaningful amount of time. Usually this is going to be years, and it's going to vary widely depending on whether or not you're very new to the world of work, or whether you have tons of experience. Let's say if you've just graduated from college, you're probably looking to look at your college time as a time frame. If you are somebody with 10 years of experience, you're probably looking at the years of experience that are relevant to this position. So for example, if you worked in the hospitality industry for the first 3 years, but then moved into corporate law and you're applying for a corporate law job, most likely you want to look at the last 7 years. I hope this makes sense. And the first thing that I want you to map, so this is the time frame in chronological order by the clock, are the moments of change that you've experienced throughout this timeline. So a moment of change is something that marked a before and after. And it doesn't need to be, totally transformational, but it can be something like, okay, I started this job, I moved into this new industry, I decided to become an entrepreneur for the first time, I took this particular course to train for this. And what you're going to do is to add moments of change after moments of change all around the map until you can see the significant moments in your career and in this time frame that have marked a before and after for you. So here I have a second one and another one, and today. Do not be conservative about this. Like, you can put as many moments as you need. If you can, also do add the moments that have to do with conflict. For example, if you've had change of management, I do not like the new manager, put that in. Reorg in my company, I was laid off. All of those things, for better or for worse, fit into this map. And now you probably haven't had the time to go through the entire map, but once you've done that, the second step is to look at feelings. So what I want you to tune into are the feelings that come with each of these moments. So for example, I have this example with startup job at coffee company. Well, here you might have felt really ecstatic about learning about coffee. You might have felt overwhelmed. You also might have experienced tiredness, etc., etc. And just really try and see what are the feelings that come up for each moment of change. If there are any beliefs or decisions that you've made as a result of some of these changes, also write that down. So a typical example here could be, you get, well, actually, let me speak of an example from my experience. I once accepted a job with the promise of a promotion. And when the promotion was meant to come in, it did not come in. Right? And so I had this big crisis, and the feelings were unfairness, injustice, like a sense of the world not taking me in as I was, and a feeling that no matter how much I did, I would not get recognized. Like, I'm not being dramatic here. It was really difficult for me. However, the moment I found myself in that state of mind, I also made a decision. And that decision was, wait a second, if I'm really so upset about this promotion, is this job the right job for me right now? And the answer in my case was, no, it is not. And we're going to take steps to move on to start moving in the direction of the new job. So I want you to map down these decisions you've taken. And once you have the whole thing, I want you to take a good read at this map, and especially at the lessons you've learned along the way. Because what you might end up with is something that is starting to show where there are areas that you might need to work on, but also where is that progression? Where is that depth? Where are all of the efforts and feelings and the moments where you really held up and kept going in spite of the difficulty? And where are all of those moments of difficulty? Because as I've told you before, in the hero's journey, what we're interested in is, what's the change you've undergone and what does it mean? And so in the slide, there's a lot of text. So I don't pretend that you will read it all, but I'm creating a story with somebody who started at, this job at coffee company, and they were really keen on being great at customer success. And so they decided that the most important thing they could do in their job was to make people feel better. And then they had a change of manager. They realized there was a need for leadership in their team. And so they got the motivation to become a people manager. And then they moved on to a people manager's role. And suddenly they were like, the most important thing is for people to feel good. And they figure out that maybe for success as a people manager, that's not the only thing, right? Because as a people manager, you don't just want somebody that makes you feel good, you also want somebody that stretches you, at least to a certain extent. And so sometimes being a people manager means not having people feel good, especially not having people feel good about you. So that would be the lesson that this person's bringing into the interview. And what this story is telling us is that this person has changed. And so this is how this exercise can really bring you this compelling idea that we were talking about. Combined with your child story and combined with your map, you should be equipped to answer all of the questions on leadership. Tell me about a time you showed leadership or initiative. The questions about conflict. Tell me about a time you faced conflict. What happened? Who was involved? How did you deal with the stakeholders? As well as the general question, tell me about yourself. Tell me about a risk you've taken, and on and on and on. So I'm going to leave space for the Q&A. I also wanted to tell you that I have some resources at the end that we will be distributing with the recording and the newsletter. But let's open it up for Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Stefania. This was a really, you dropped some really knowledge bombs today, and it was like super helpful. I have a lot of questions from my end as well, but let's open so the audience can go in, and the floor is open for Q&A right now. So everybody, if you can just start typing in the questions in the chat, Stefania can start answering them. We have about 15 minutes, so we'll try to answer as much as possible. And the resources, as Stefania said, we're going to send out the recording in 48 hours, and all the resources and all the templates that you need, it's going to be in your email within 48 hours. So yes, go for it.
I see there's a question, but I don't know why it doesn't come up for me. So
yeah, so this is one question from Wenk. So the question is, how do I get an ATS resume format? Like, for example, a lot of people want to, when they're applying, there's scores of people applying for a certain position. So I would, in fact, add to this question, what is the process like, and how should you optimize your resume so it actually goes through that huge pool and reaches the hiring manager?
Yeah, okay, so that's a great question. Now, full transparency, I've never optimized my resume for that, not for ATS specifically. However, what will make your resume stand out is what we've been talking about. But specifically in a resume, what Google will want to see is how you're able to tell your story, not in the way of what you've done, but based on the results you've driven. So something that really that was really important when I was first hired into Google was the fact that I was able to quantify all of the scholarships that I'd gotten. So my CV did not say, you know, scholarship A, scholarship B. It actually said, I have been awarded 37,000 euros in scholarships, right, throughout my career. That's the difference between saying, you know, I was a good student and I was an excellent student. This is just one example. In terms of describing a role, so I don't know what role you're interviewing for or attempting to interview for, but let's talk about a project management role, for example. For a project manager, what we would look at are hours of work saved. And specifically, total, amount of FTE full-time employees saved. So are you able to show that for each project you managed, you went from, you know, needing 10 hours a week to 2 hours a week? If you are applying for a role which is more sales-based, were you able to transform the process so that instead of pitching one client at a time, you were able to pitch the same solution to 50 clients at a time? So that would be an example of scalability. But you truly want to think about every single item on your CV in these terms. So nothing of the kind leader for team X, or in charge of operations. All of that will not pass the bar.
Sweet. There's another question by Yuki, and first of all, she's a fan of the book. She's a fan of Joseph Campbell and the Hero's Journey. So that's awesome. And what she was, it's a very direct question, is that it's for you, Stefania, do you actually help individuals map out, the exercises, like the map exercise that we did? So what is your expertise, and how can you help map that journey out?
Well, I would go deeper into the questions. One very important part of it would be to ask, 3 whys. That's a typical one. Like, if you tell me, okay, this was a moment of change for me, I would ask, okay, why? And then you might probably have a superficial answer first. And then I would really get you to think about what is really transformational about it. And then I would help you go into the body and actually feel the feelings that come along with that. Because what really makes a difference in this map is if you're able to go from, just getting a feeling for the decisions you've taken to understanding what's the underlying decision that made you take all of those. So I'm gonna give you a very concrete example. You might be the kind of person who's learned that in order to be loved, you need to achieve. That's a very, very typical scenario. And so what you might find yourself doing is finding more and more and more and more places that demand increasing responsibility until, for example, you face a burnout, right? That could be a story that comes up on the map. And unless you're willing to take a look at the fact that, oh, wait, I actually have this feeling that I need to achieve all the time, that's never going to change. And that's also the power of this circular narrative, that you see which patterns keep repeating themselves. So another way of finding a repetitive pattern is if the same manager shows up 15 times in your career. And I don't, of course, mean the same person, but the same kind of person. And what you find is you're just not able to work with them in the right way. And then the question can then go deeper and be like, okay, what is really triggering? How can you create empathy and compassion towards that person and yourself in the process? So this map is a starting point for a lot.
Got it. One question that I had personally is the post-interview process. And Yuki's saying thank you, so thumbs up for Yuki. So what is the, like, for example, what is a good way to get process the interview? Because I've seen a lot of people go in the interview and then the feedback, like how do they actually, how do they get the feedback from the interviewer, right? Because a lot of these big FAANG companies are notorious for not giving feedback, to the interviewees. So what is a good way to just find a workaround?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. I mean, if well, first of all, I've been interviewed by Google twice, and I was hired by Google twice. So I did not have this scenario where I wasn't given the feedback, where the feedback was positive, and that's about all I needed to know. I believe one way that could work, although I've never done it myself, and I don't know of anybody that's done it, could be to reach out to the individual people who interviewed you, if you know the names, and ask for direct feedback. You might find that people are open to that. Most likely it's going to be difficult. And that's just for the sheer amount of candidates that come through and work that is involved in interviewing. Because as I was saying before, when you interview with Google, like if you're the interviewer, you have to write really, really compelling and extensive reasons for both hire and not hire. That just creates a lot of work. Now, having said that, it's also possible to ask for feedback during the interview. That's not something that a lot of people do. That at the end of the interview, you could say, okay, I'm curious to get some feedback about how this interview went, which does not mean you're going to get a yes or no, right? But if you have a specific question where you will want to do better, that's one way of doing it. And one example that comes to mind is from, one time I interviewed internally at Google. So I was in the process of moving roles. And the first interviewer asked me a question that I felt I had not answered successfully. So what I did do was I answered that question to the second interviewer. That's another very smart way of doing that. So if you feel like, you're not done great in one interview, you just use the next interviewer as a way of providing your better answer. Now, that's also going to show, different skills, such as self-reflection, determination, and all of that.
Got it. There's another question coming in. It's from Antonio, and it's a very very smart question. So Antonio's asking, can a recent college graduate compete with younger recent college grads and more experienced individuals in the same age group?
Yes, they can.
Mhm.
And that's a definite yes, because I think I was telling Danish before we started that when I was hired into Google, I was hired into a level 2, which is a starting role full-time. And I was 27 at the time. I had previous working experience at the United Nations as a UNV and an intern. And I also had, summer jobs experience and other things. But in my cohort of new Google hires, there were a lot of people who were literally just fresh out of college, 21 years old. So, and we were starting in the same role. It's not a question of how much experience you have. It's more a question of being able to show those attributes that I shared in the beginning. So the values are particularly important, especially thriving into chaos, especially being the kind of person that, you know, is very proactive, self-organizing, and so forth.
A very pointy question by John is, what is the biggest mistake you see candidates make, in their storytelling? Because not everybody's extroverted. It's very hard for them to come up with stories. So what is that biggest mistake that you see that can be fixed?
Well, I mean, the first mistake is lack of preparation, because the questions that are going to be asked are really along the lines. I mean, of course, some questions are more complicated. One type of question that we're not touching so much upon is role-related knowledge, for which you really must have some role-related knowledge. What I can tell you is that when I first interviewed for a Google Ads role, I read and studied the entire Google Ads compendium to prepare for the certification before the interview. And that was fundamental, because I was asked questions such as, which Google Ads feature would you add? I mean, if you don't know the product, you will not have an idea of how to answer this kind of question. Now, having said that, if you don't have the time, to go through the entire product, usually that's not totally disqualifying, as long as you're very good at answering the other questions, which are about leadership, conflict management, presence. Some of the attributes that are really important are about, number 8, can you navigate relationships with everybody within the company at different levels? So, for example, another question that comes up a lot is, would you be able to explain a concept, like, I don't know, explain the color blue to somebody who can see? That is an example. More often is along the lines of, explain this to your grandma, or explain Bitcoins to your grandma would be, I think, a good one for now, or NFTs.
Yeah.
And now that question is really meant to see if you're able to relate and connect with different people, regardless of whether they are, experts or newbies at something. But in the same way, it's about whether or not you're able to connect equally well with somebody who's a director and somebody who just started or is below your level. And then it's conflict and leadership. I mean, leadership is the most important from my perspective, really showing initiative.
Awesome. I think that's the end of the webinar, guys. Yuki, you have another question. So what you can do is, I think what we can do is, so we're going to wrap up the webinar, but Yuki, you can just go on to Karis.io. You can just log in and just book a free session with Stefania. So she's very readily available, and you can just have all the questions and direct questions related to your second round and third round interviews. So yeah, time's run out. So Stefania, last piece of advice for the audience, like, what do you have to say to them?
Well, I mean, for me, the most important thing is that as you go through your own story, you really think about what makes you you, and try to keep that in mind during the interview. There's a lot of trying to fit into boxes that are not necessarily the right fit. And I think that as much as it's important to do a good impressions on the interviewers, it's also very important that you're there with your senses alert and able to tell whether this is exactly the next step that you want for your career. So, I mean, it's all about authenticity and just owning who you are and understanding that the outcome of this interview does not define you.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Stefania, for just going and just really going deeper into the questions, into the exercises, amazing exercises. For everybody who's attending, if you sign up right now, go to gas.io and just write Stefania's name and book a free session. Also, we have a promotional offer. So if you sign up before before Monday, so what you can get is you get $100 of starting credit. So you can in fact have a full long session with free starting credit. That's on us, and you can just go in and start booking the phone calls and the video calls. Christmas is coming up. A lot of, Stefania's going to get really busy. We have her for a few days, so go and grab those slots. And thank you, Stefania. And we'll do a follow up with the recording within 48 hours. So go in, use the discount voucher. It's been applied. Just make an account on Caddis, book Stefania in, and we'll see you on the other side. Okay.
Right.
Thank you and
you.
happy
It was a
holidays.
pleasure. Bye.
Bye. Bye.